You look at empaths and you think they are soft. You think their kindness means weakness. You think because they forgive, understand, stay silent, and keep giving chances, they have no limit. But every empath has one invisible line buried deep inside them, one final boundary connected directly to their soul. And the dangerous part is this. Most people never see that line until they cross it. Because empaths do not explode at the first betrayal. They absorb pain. They rationalize disrespect. They replay your excuses in their mind. They try to understand your wounds while bleeding from their own. That is why so many toxic people mistake an empath's patience for permission. But patience is not permission. Compassion is not surrender. And silence is not acceptance. The empath stays because they believe people can change. They believe love can heal damage. They believe honesty can rebuild trust. But once a person repeatedly violates the emotional safety of an empath, something terrifying happens inside them. Their heart does not break loudly. It shuts down quietly. And when an empath emotionally shuts down, there is often no return. Because the one line you should never cross with an empath is betrayal of trust, not anger, not disagreement, not distance. Betrayal. The moment an empath realizes their loyalty is being abused, their emotional connection begins to die. Slowly at first, then all at once. You have to understand how deeply empaths bond with people. They do not connect casually. They absorb energy, emotions, tension, hidden sadness, unspoken fears. They study your soul without even trying. When they love you, they build emotional homes inside themselves for you to live in. That is why betrayal hits them differently. It is not just disappointment. It feels like spiritual destruction, because the empath trusted you with the most sacred parts of themselves. And when you lie to them, manipulate them, disrespect them, or emotionally use them, it creates a psychological fracture deep in their nervous system. Most people think empaths leave because they are emotional. Empaths leave because they finally become emotionally exhausted. There is a difference. One moment changes everything for an empath. It is the moment they realize they have been fighting for someone who would never fight for them. That realization destroys illusions instantly. Suddenly, all the ignored red flags connect together. Every manipulation makes sense. Every fake apology becomes visible. Every moment they abandon themselves to keep peace becomes painfully clear. And once an empath sees the truth clearly, they can never unsee it. That is the terrifying part. Because before that moment, they were willing to forgive almost anything. But after that moment, their emotional detachment becomes absolute, cold, silent, final. People are shocked when this happens. They say, "You changed." The empath finally stopped betraying themselves for people who kept betraying them. There is a massive psychological mistake people make with empaths. They assume emotional people cannot become emotionally unavailable. But the deepest empaths often become the coldest once they are pushed too far. Why? Because pain transforms awareness. After enough betrayal, the empath learns that unlimited empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. They realize they spent years understanding everyone except themselves. Protecting everyone except themselves, saving everyone except themselves. And eventually the nervous system reaches survival mode. The heart closes to protect what remains. That is why the empath who once answered instantly now disappears. The empath who once begged for communication now becomes unreachable. The empath who once cried now feels nothing. And nothing is more dangerous than an empath who no longer feels emotionally safe with you. Because once emotional safety dies, love slowly dies with it. Many people never understand the silent war. Empaths fight internally. Empaths constantly battle between intuition and hope. Their intuition sees the truth early. It notices inconsistencies, emotional manipulation, fake energy, hidden resentment. But hope keeps whispering, maybe they'll change. So the empath stays longer than they should. They ignore the heaviness in their chest. They silence their instincts. They explain away disrespect. Why? Because empaths see potential in people. And that becomes their greatest weakness. They fall in love with who someone could become instead of accepting who they currently are. Toxic people unconsciously exploit this. They give just enough affection to keep the empath emotionally invested, just enough guilt to make the empath stay, just enough apologies to restart the cycle. But eventually the empath's subconscious mind reaches a breaking point. And when that point arrives, the shift is irreversible. The empath stops explaining, stops arguing, stops chasing closure, stops trying to fix things. They emotionally detach in silence. And silence from an empath is never random. It is the final stage of emotional death. People fear angry reactions because anger is loud, but the real danger is calm detachment. Because when an empath becomes calm after prolonged pain, it means they are done, completely done. No more emotional energy, no more hope, no more attachment. The soul has already left the relationship before the body physically leaves it. And most people notice too late that is why so many people suddenly panic after losing an empath. Not because they valued them properly while they had them, but because they never believed the empath would actually walk away. They thought forgiveness was infinite. They thought access to the empath's heart was permanent. They thought emotional loyalty had no expiration date. But even the deepest ocean has limits. Even the kindest soul eventually reaches emotional starvation. And when an empath finally chooses themselves, the people who hurt them experience something terrifying. Consequences. Suddenly there is no emotional support waiting for them. No unconditional understanding. No emotional caretaker absorbing their chaos. They feel the absence of genuine empathy for the first time. And that absence becomes haunting. Because authentic empaths are rare. Most people do not realize what they had until the warmth disappears forever. The empath warned them in 1,000 silent ways before leaving. Through emotional exhaustion. Through tears. Through over-explaining. Through begging for honesty. Through asking for basic respect. But nobody listened because empaths are often only valued for what they give, not for what they feel. This creates a devastating psychological pattern. The empath becomes emotionally overused while the other person becomes emotionally dependent. One gives endlessly. The other consumes endlessly. Eventually, imbalance destroys the connection. Relationships cannot survive where one soul constantly sacrifices itself to keep the other comfortable. And this is where the empath transforms. Pain forces evolution. Betrayal forces awakening. The empath begins understanding a brutal truth. Being needed is not the same as being loved. Many people need empaths because empaths regulate emotions, create peace, provide validation, and absorb emotional darkness. But very few people truly protect the empath in return. Once the empath realizes this imbalance, their entire perception changes. They begin valuing boundaries more than approval, peace more than attachment, self-respect more than emotional dependency. And suddenly the empath becomes unreachable to manipulative people. Because healed empaths no longer confuse suffering with love. They no longer romanticize emotional pain. They no longer stay loyal to people committed to hurting them. This is why crossing the final line with an empath is such a catastrophic mistake. Because when an empath leaves emotionally, they rarely return the same. The version of them you once knew disappears forever. The trusting version dies. The endlessly patient version dies. The emotionally available version dies. And what replaces it is someone far more powerful. An empath with boundaries. An empath with self-awareness. An empath who finally understands their worth. That transformation changes everything. Now they notice manipulation immediately. They walk away from disrespect faster. They stop explaining themselves to emotionally unavailable people. They stop trying to save broken individuals who refuse accountability. And perhaps most painful of all for those who lost them, the empath eventually stops missing them too. That is the part nobody talks about. Empaths grieve deeply, but once healing begins, they detach completely. Because true healing rewires emotional attachment. The empath starts remembering who they were before the emotional damage. Their energy returns. Their confidence returns. Their intuition sharpens. Their peace returns. And suddenly the person who broke them no longer has access to their emotions. That realization destroys toxic people internally because control disappears. The empath is no longer emotionally reachable through guilt, manipulation, or empty promises. They are finally free. This is why emotional betrayal is the one line you should never cross with an empath. Because empaths can survive pain, but they cannot survive repeated violation of emotional trust without changing forever. And once they change, you cannot undo it. People underestimate emotional wounds because they cannot physically see them. But emotional betrayal changes brain chemistry, nervous system responses, attachment patterns, sleep, self-worth, and identity itself. Empaths especially carry emotional experiences deeply into the subconscious mind. That is why they remember energy more than words. They remember how someone made them feel when nobody else was watching. They remember emotional inconsistency. They remember being abandoned emotionally while physically present beside someone. These invisible wounds accumulate silently over time until the empath's mind finally says, enough. And once that internal switch flips, there is no dramatic announcement, no revenge, no chaos, just distance, silence, absence. The empath disappears emotionally first, then physically second. And the cold truth is this. By the time most people realize the empath is truly gone, the empath already mourned the relationship months earlier while still pretending to stay. That is why their exit feels sudden to others but inevitable to them. The decision was built slowly through accumulated disappointment, broken trust, repeated disrespect, emotional neglect, and eventually the empath chooses self-preservation over emotional self-sacrifice. That choice changes their life forever. Because once an empath learns to stop abandoning themselves for others, they become almost unstoppable. Their intuition becomes stronger. Their standards become higher. Their energy becomes protected, and they finally understand the lesson pain was trying to teach them all along. Love should not require self-destruction. Real love feels safe, honest, consistent, reciprocal. Real love does not force someone to constantly question their worth. Real love does not punish vulnerability. Real love does not manipulate empathy into weakness. And once an empath experiences peace after leaving toxic attachment, they never want chaos, disguised as love again. So if you ever meet an empath, understand this carefully. Their kindness is sacred. Their loyalty is rare. Their emotional depth is not weakness. It is power most people are too disconnected to understand. But if you betray that trust repeatedly, if you lie, manipulate, emotionally exploit, or disrespect the soul that kept trying to love you honestly, eventually you will meet a version of the empath you never expected. Silent, detached, unreachable. And by then it will already be too late.